G'day legends, happy Friday, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now today, as always, we do have a lot to go over. We're going to look at the maps and we're going to look at where Ukraine in multiple different locations has launched offensive and has had success clearing some of that territory as well. So we're going to look at that, defensive positions, and see where some of these movements are coming from. As we know, there was a redeployment of forces from some areas. We need, of course, to look over this Department of Justice, what is happening in the US to do, of course, with Kremlin funding directly through shell companies and then on to bloggers, YouTubers, all of this. And then I want to talk about some strikes and we'll look at some footage there. And I want to talk about something that I was reading yesterday to do with entanglement of conventional and nuclear forces as well. Now, some of you will be aware that today I actually get my results for my brain tumour. Now, I was pleasantly surprised. I'll say that a lot of people actually didn't know that I've been dealing with this. This is the reason that I'm not still in the military and that I was medically separated from the military is I was discovered with a about 42 to 45 millimeter tumour on my left frontal lobe of my brain. I then went through 13 months of chemotherapy, other treatments, blah, blah, blah. It's too risky to get rid of surgically. So at the moment I'm watch and wait and see. There's sort of a surgeon, there's one surgeon who will work on it, but I will lose a lot of control of at least my right arm. So I'm in this like, do I get a few more years but lose mobility, or do I sacrifice a few years? I get a scan. I'm meant to get one every 3 months. I missed the last one because I was overseas. So it's 6 months at this point, but I'll let you guys know as soon as I can. I'll post it up on the Telegram. But I do want in this video to give my opinion on this Kremlin funding to Tenet Media. Well, we think it's Tenet Media and YouTuber bloggers in there. And I'm no expert, but fairly extensive reading on Russian and Soviet informational operations and misinformation. So I want to talk about that and how I see it. Somewhat similarities between what some people are saying and somewhat differently in others as well. All open source. And this is the thing, is Putin was ex-KGB. We know there's a lot of defectors from the KGB. It collapsed with the Soviet Union. So I do think some of that information that came out of those operations that is being leaked for massively, at least when the Soviet Union collapsed, is still relevant there. So we'll talk about that. But like I always say on here, whether it's me, whether it's this bloke, that bloke, however, just take everything online with a grain of salt and open your eyes and open your ears to as many different sources of information as possible. I'm sure there's plenty of YouTubers out there who are receiving funding or a push of information, something that they wouldn't want to be that then open about. And like I say, especially in the US with this US election, it's going to get very wild towards the end of the year where individuals, states, everything are trying to push information as well. I'm actually thinking of fundraising for a ticket to go to Washington in November just to see and go like live and just watch what then unfolds. Anyway, let's talk about strikes, then maps, then the Department of Justice. So some good news for Ukraine today. They'll be receiving from Romania a Patriot air defense system. This is one of the most in-need systems for Ukraine to strike those ballistics, those somewhat hypersonic cruise missiles that are coming in as well. And as we do know that Russia has increased those strikes, and by some of the footage coming out, looks like some of these are more successful. These are strikes on Lviv yesterday from these ballistic missiles here too, and you can see on this third one what looks like to me an unsuccessful interception here and then a strike as well. So air defense is one of those things so in need for Ukraine. I know Zelensky said they need like 25-ish of these systems. I think it's about 5 at the moment, but to give coverage not only to the cities but then strategically important areas too, like the F-16s or Kursk. And this is one of the problems, is as that gets expanded or more assets come into play, other areas are going to have limited coverage as well. There was an attack last night by a Ukrainian surface drones in Novorossiysk. Now, we have no idea. You can see that these are getting fired upon. So far, there's nothing come out about the damage that these caused. But what is important to note on these is these are actually from the port of Sevastopol that have moved around to here due to these strikes on the Black Sea fleet as well. It has been a while since I've actually seen those surface drone BECs come into play. Now, the White House, this is about a day old or maybe 2 days old, but then John Kirby, I believe, has said this, that Russia moved 90% of its aircraft to attack Ukraine outside of the 300-kilometre zone of the Ukrainian border, so that the argument that somehow if you just give ATACMS, not give the ATACMS, but give the permissions for the ATACMS to fire, that they're going to be able to hit the majority of Russian aircraft and air bases are in fact used to strike them, is not true. It's a misconception. So what we know is Russia has moved these aircraft, particularly those like Su-34s, outside of that range, so the ATACMS couldn't strike them regardless, even if they did. And then there are calls then for much longer strike capabilities to go into Ukraine to strike those bases as well. That you need to not hit the missile coming in. If you're going to have success, you need to hit the aircraft, particularly probably on the ground. Now, something I was just thinking about this because I was reading a really good study, like textbook yesterday, I know I'm boring, about China, Taiwan, and the US. And one of the problems that the US is looking upon China is what they're calling nuclear entanglement. So this entanglement of conventional and nuclear forces to do with PLA, like long-range missiles that are hot swap. So the hot swap means you have a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead on board. The problem is if you strike that, it could be seen as a strike against one of China's nuclear deterrence facilities. And I do wonder, as I was reading, I was like, oh shit, mate, is there something in the US? Because we have seen that US, has really taken a step back from strikes against some of these facilities because of the threat, the coercion of, nuclear messaging coming out of Russia. I wonder if there is any thoughts in the US for long-range strikes going to Ukraine against Tu-22, Tu-160, what of course are nuclear, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. What are nuclear-capable aircraft, if that could be interpreted like that if it was from a US missile being fired onto that system. I've just thought of that nuclear entanglement and the problem that creates. And I do believe we saw 2 times in a week with 3 different drones, Ukrainian strikes against long-range over-the-horizon early warning system radars. And then since that point, we haven't seen any of that. And I think the US there would have stepped in and gone, don't do that. This is part of that deterrent system and the more threats of this. I wonder if that has anything to do with striking long-range strategic bombers, the TU-style aircraft, not really the SU style. I just thought about that and that nuclear entanglement as I was reading it, because this is one of the big problems saying with US strikes if China was to come onto Taiwan. Some of these, whether on purpose or not, it's sort of shielded by the nuclear threat there too. And this is where nuclear weapons are tactically useless, strategically the most important thing a military can have. Tactically, there's no use for them. Strategically, the deterrence of that system, the how quickly you can rise the cost of war with that system, fantastic. So it's a bit like one of these ones with tactical versus strategic use. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. It's always done strategically. If a tactical weapon is something that could be used again and again and not have massive overarching effect from the entire state. So I just thought that was something on that entanglement front. So I'm getting a bit unwell. Let's have a look at Ukraine here. You have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, where you see green on this map is a Ukrainian advancement, but over 2 weeks. Blue is under 2 weeks, except for in the Kursk Oblast. Now, there are some Ukrainian advancements in here today. Now, what we need to actually look at and talk about was an extension of what we spoke about yesterday. 93rd Mech is being moved from Chasiv Yar Bakhmut front all around to try and stop the grinding Russian advancement on Pokrovsk. Now, we can see, not really by this map today, because this map shows more Russian advancement in here. Forget about this up here, we'll talk about that in a second. But other maps do show that Ukraine did have success pushing back on the Russians in here over the past 24 hours. So let's look firstly at this. Now, where this is talking about the Pokrovsk front is around Seledove, where back to Mikhailivka. Now, one of the problems, I think, with Deep State is Deep State never showed the Russian advancement to Seledove, so they can't actually show the Ukrainian push back on this. But during the last 48 hours, the Ukrainian army launched a counterattack and managed to recapture most of the town of Seledove and parts of Mikhailivka. So they have had a successful push by Syriac back into these areas. I'm seeing this across multiple different maps, having a push back into here. And this does line up with the redeployment and reinforcement forces that have come into here. Now, what I believe they'll be trying to push for is through Mikhailivka and try and get back these large defensive lines. Will it be successful? Well, it's very early to have some prediction on that, but with these defensive lines, I think that is what they'll be trying to push on and stop the Russians getting further west, so they can push further to the south. But Syrsky did say something very interesting about Pokrovsk, and we'll give some perspective on this. He goes, over the last 6 days, the enemy hasn't advanced a single metre in the Pokrovsk direction. In other words, our strategy is working. We've taken the ability to manoeuvre and deploy forces from other directions, and weakening has been felt in other areas. We know the amount of artillery intensity of the offensive has decreased. That said, by these maps, by the last 6 days, that statement isn't correct. We have seen Russia make gains in the Pokrovsk direction. Just look at this map today. Now, net square kilometre, that may be hard to tell with this pushback in here, but I do believe if we would take the last week, Russia would still have the net increase in territory from their Memrik, Lizivkia, these areas, even regardless of these pushback in here. And I've seen a lot of pro-Ukrainian pages calling that out, going, this is just false information, that there was definitely some advancement in here by the Russian forces. So let's have a look at where this has shown advancement down in here today. Now, this is the Syriac map as well. We'll just zoom in a little bit to give you a better idea. Now, this is never the easiest to line up, but the Russian army took control of Lysivkia. Again, Lysivkia here was shown about 3 or 4 days ago by live UA map that it had come under control, but then a further southwesterly push, Ukrainsk, these areas as well, and approaching Gornik, of course, down in here. So then further that push to the south, then putting this salient here under then a lot of pressure with the lack of paved roads out of here and the push through Krasnoyarivka as well. So this is an area to keep an eye on as well, but we have seen a successful counter-attack in there. It's not the only place we've seen a successful counter-attack today. So this gives a better idea if we scroll back a day and then forward a day. So back 5th, 6th. So what you can see is an expansion of Russian control on the flanks of New York, but a large increase in Ukrainian control in the center of New York. Now, this, of course, showed this surround in here, which we've spoken about for the last 2 to 3 weeks. And it does look like Ukraine launched a successful operation to get those guys out and actually hold ground, as Russia has increased control then on the flanks of here. So let's look at then what Syriac says about this. Now, he's showing very, very similar in the amount of movement in here by the Ukrainian forces as well. So trying to Torres front since the beginning of the week, Ukrainian army managed to completely drive out the Russian army from the locality of Nepalivkia and take new positions in the north of the town of New York. Thanks to this, possible to consolidate a supply line for troops entrenched in this factory. They've been holding out for almost 3 weeks. Moreover, Ukrainian attempt to enter the west of the town was repelled by Russian forces. So another push down in here, but it said it was then repelled. But those guys who were held up in there for 3 weeks, which is a hell of a lot of time, or nearly 3 weeks, managed to get pulled out. And then the forces who have done a handover takeover, Hoto there, have then actually been able to sustain some positions in there. So again, we'll keep watch and see and what actually occurs in here. Now, no other changes shown around here, but while we're here, that Syriac does to say north of Druzhba, of course, up in here, that Russia did capture some more positions in here as well. Now, let's move to Chasiv Yar. Now, this is an interesting one because we see this Ukrainian advancement in some areas, but we also then see today, for the first time in a while, a push across into Chasiv Yar. We've seen some back and forward in here, but from Kalinivka, we do see that Russians have crossed the canal in here. Now, what this map does not show is that NOEL reports showed yesterday and other maps are showing that around Klishkivka, this area came under control by the Russian forces up to this canal, and this map is showing then a push across the canal, then today here. Now, is this every action has an equal and opposite reaction? Movement down to Pokrovsk may mean movement in here too. We see this push across in here. Now, let's firstly talk about this Klishkivka. I want to show you a couple of maps showing this. So, Noel reports, of course, showed this yesterday. AMK map is showing it today down to where we see this corner in here. And then, as well, Suryak is showing this too. So, we have multiple sources showing there was a push. Some show different amounts, but definitely a push somewhere in Klishkivka to, of course, the south of Bakhmut up to that canal. And then we see this push up in the north here. And then we have Suryak map, basically the exact same location. It'd be hard to show any difference in here. But last 2 days, Russian army took control of new positions west part of Kalinivka. Again, crossing that canal is going to be very, very difficult to get a foothold across any crossing like this, but we have seen that from this map today. Now let's move just down into Ugledar. No changes shown on this map today, but we do see some screenshots and some footage coming out. Large Russian attacks on motorcycles and other vehicles as well in here, being repelled, having large losses, and this is no change to Ugledar. I would be hard up to say any town has had such long attacks and large losses as the defense of Ugledar, and I think this is why Russia at this point are trying to just go around the fucking thing and strategically encircled it and take it that way, because the amount of attacks launched into here that have been unsuccessful for 2 years is bloody massive. So let's then have a look out to the west side of here, where we saw then movement yesterday as well. Now, this map today showing very, very similar deep state to this. Of course, we saw some map updates yesterday, advancing west of here, new positions and direction of Zolota Niva. So down in here as well, where the Ukrainian push from here then retreated back to. So we'll get more of an idea of exactly what is happening there. Now, let's push up then further. Now, some of the most large shift we actually see on this map is around Pishani, Berestov, Novoselivsky front. Then today on the deep state, we see that Russia is expanding some of their control out from Pishani, as well as then shortening the front line around Novoselivsky and Berestov front in here. Of course, what we presume is Russia is trying to get to the waterway to split a north and south element, but shorter term than this, are trying to then cut off this area in here, again shortening that front line as well. But there has been some expansion of control in here. Now we see another Ukrainian advancement then in the Lipsy front, and these two Kharkiv operations here. We step back yesterday and forward today. It doesn't show that Russian positions have fallen in here. It shows that the grey zone have come under Ukrainian control. So where the lines are, of course, you have a level of uncontrolled territory in that, so the Ukrainian territory has moved forward an advancement in here. Why might this be happening? Well, we do presume that if Russia was going to pick up troops from anywhere to go and support, of course, the Kursk operation, it's probably going to be out of here. Not only it's fucking close, but also in other areas of the front line that they see as strategically important and where they want to hold ground. Kharkiv is not as crucial, at least as Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zap, for what we see the Russian messaging. So we would see potentially a pull out of here. Therefore, we can see an ease up on the front line. Now, no changes shown in here by Suri. Oh, sorry. Let's go back just down, because Suryak does confirm this advancement right here. Kharkiv access recaptures your positions. Sorry. Now, Deep State and Noel don't show any changes in here today. I'll show you Noel's. No changes in here. Suryak does show some different, though. Russian army expanded their control over clear following cleaning operations in this area. Clash with Ukrainian army are taking place in Nevidov without significant changes. So on the northern sort of finger coming out of here, it does say that Russia did take back some positions in here. Again, the north is so hard to know what is exactly happening in here. But let's look at what Sursky in the same interview with CNN has said about this. That has been planning to launch an offensive attack on Ukraine from the Kursk region before Kyiv's surprise border crossing incursion. One of the things we know about Kursk was there was a very successful Ukrainian misinformation campaign to do with Russia had a build-up in Kursk. Therefore, no one was suspicious on the Ukrainian build-up of forces in Sumy. But Syrskyi has said it reduced the threat of an enemy offensive and prevented them from acting. We moved to fighting enemy's territory so they could feel what we feel every single day. Outlined the key objective of the operation was to stop Russia using Kursk as a launch pad for a new offensive, diverting Moscow forces from other areas, take prisoners, and to boost the morale of Ukrainian troops and nation overall. And this is something that we have seen is a lot of messaging saying it jeopardized the Russian operation that was about to launch out of Kursk into Sumy. We pre-hit it first. What doesn't ring true in that is, well, then there was no large buildup of Russian force. We saw that offensive have so much early success because there was fuck all forces actually protecting it. The failure of Russia was there was no forces, really high-end forces at least, protecting that area. That's why it was successful and why Russia had to scramble other units there, that if there was some build-up of the launch into Sumy to jeopardize that operation, there would have been units already then in place ready to rock and roll. Does that make sense? But here, the take prisoners, boost morale, this is right in line with what Zelensky has said then about the exchange fund, exchange of prisoners. How many prisoners? It is so hard to tell. Obviously, numbers range between 250 and the highest of 600, and a boost of morale for Ukrainian troops and nation overall, which that has had a success in maybe overall numbers, but I'm not sure how that would be affecting down in areas like Pokrovsk or Chasiv Yar as well, if elements had been moved from there and you're moving rearwards as well. So I think these two, absolutely, but the diversion of forces, we've seen Zelensky claim 60,000 Russian forces have been moved to there, which I would say is a concern. If Russia has moved 60,000 forces out of the occupied areas and they're still having success there, to do that, that's more concerning than them not moving. So again, we'll wait and see what exactly happens in here, whether Russian command is happy just to forego some land temporarily to tie up Ukrainian forces in here, or they then don't want the optics of Ukraine occupying the land and launch an offensive back into here as well. It'll be very interesting to know. A lot of interesting map movements today with Ukrainian blue showing up for the first time in a while, at least for occupied areas if we disregard Kursk, as well as some pushes in other areas of the front. Attritional warfare, plugging holes with maneuver elements, but also grinding forward in other areas to cause then chaos there when something else moves. It's an interesting war to look at as far as protracted attritional warfare in modern times with modern systems coming into play as well. Now, we need to talk about this DOJ, the Department of Justice, and what has come out today. And I want to talk about propaganda, how good propaganda works, and maybe how I see this in line with the media, but how maybe different as well. So let's have a look over some of the bits that has happened in this and who exactly is then actually tied up in this. So it's very easy probably to just look over this key facts thing here as well, that it matches the description of Tenet Media. That's who we think it is. Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, Lawrence Southern, but particularly they're pointing at Benny Johnson and Tim Pool. Of course, haven't been named in this, but given like it has X amount of subscribers, that's who people are pointing at in here as well. And these other Dave Rubin here, I think he has the Rubin report, whatever. Media employees covertly poured 10 million into the company of English language videos, often consistent with government of Russia's interest amplifying US domestic division. We need to talk then about domestic division in the US. Shows focus on conservative political and cultural war issues. The DOJ's indictment doesn't accuse the right-wing influencers, but it identifies a commenter 1 and commenter 2 of any wrongdoing. Instead, says they were deceived by company's 2 founders and Russian state operatives. So at this point, we still need to look at that they were somewhat deceived. Is it being a useful idiot in this, where you should have seen through this? Potentially. Do people see dollar signs? Absolutely they do. So that's important to know. If those people are saying that people are going to go to jail for this, if they can prove that they were deceived into this, rather than they were specifically doing this on purpose. That's just interesting to know. And this investor here was just a fictional persona from the indictment who it again goes through for the money coming through shell corporations also. So I want to smash through this, and then I want to talk about reverse psychology, what Putin has said about the US election, my view on the US election, and Russian information campaigns from the KGB through the SVR and FSB at the moment, and where things line up and where things don't line up for my limited knowledge. And of course, people are going, well, you work for them anyway. No, I'm not getting paid $100,000 a fucking week like these blokes are. And to be honest, the Kremlin got fucking ripped off. For these guys getting, 60 to 150,000 views a video, $100,000 a week, fucking, ripped off. Anyway, Russia Today, formerly known, blah, 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 is a controlled state media outlet funded by the government of Russia. It was sanctioned due to the beginning of the war, and they have to cease operation in the US, Canada, UK, and the EU of an entire empire of covert projects to shape the public opinion of Western audiences. You can go and look up this if you want to read it. They've deployed nearly 10 million laundered through a network of foreign shell entities for TikTok, Instagram, X, and YouTube. One thing I'll say, 10 million is a lot of money, but when we're talking state information campaign shit, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw things much, much more than that, especially to try and have influence in the US. They focus on things like immigration, inflation, other topics related to domestic and foreign policy, and consistent with the government of Russia's interest in US domestic division, opposition to core of Russia's interest as such as its ongoing war in Ukraine. Now, this is very interesting when we talk about domestic division. And again, how much influence have these Russian elements through then these speakers had for division in the US and the West? Because what I see is, okay, they've probably had some element of this, but you can't just discredit any division now onto this. This is a small part of maybe why there's division. The reason for division in the West is many routes going out into completely different views of things as well. You can't just now blame the division is because of this. No, this isn't in Australia, and I know that in Australia, we're going to talk about Australian interference by Iran, China, Russia. This specifically, maybe not. The division here is massive as well, and it's not being, it might be pushed by some foreign entities, but the baseline of that is very different in this as well. The amount of videos they've had and the amount of subscribers, this is why we do think it's Poole and Johnson they're talking about, and leveraging their audience from this private investor who, again, doesn't actually then exist. The RTs promote objectives of the government of Russia by publishing disinformation and propaganda. When direct propaganda is not effective, however, RTs pursued malign influence campaigns through countries opposed to a policy, including the United States, to sow domestic divisions, thereby weaken opposition of government and Russian objectives. Now, the Soviets and the Russians have had varying degrees of success in informational warfare. Now, most cases where they've had success is not that they've invented a new narrative, it's merely promoting one that already exists. You pick at that and then you promote that and then make it large. And we've spoken about the FSB and SVR operations currently into Africa and Asia, trying to paint the West that it's given up its conservative traditional values. Now, again, in the crux of propaganda, that if that is completely a falsified idea, that won't have any success. Again, propaganda is the right idea, must be set forth in the appropriate way. In other words, secret propaganda is to tell the truth, but in the appropriate form. So you're telling problems that may exist. Is there division in the West to do with immigration? What do they put out in here? That doesn't say, but things like immigration, the political parties, education systems, Trump versus Harris, all of this, yes. Does that exist? 100%. Propaganda means, okay, that exists, that's true, and push it the right way set forth for where you're pushing the propaganda. So we can't just now discredit everything onto something like this. And one of them said, I asked my editor at RT, Russia Today, for Brexit, and anything that causes chaos is RT's line. This is something we see more and more of as people get paid for clicks. That's how people earn money on these websites like this, is you're paid when people click on videos. That's why you'll see outrage media just then massive. That I know being Russian, some folks aren't too hot on them. So they had some idea here that their audience may not be too hot on the Russians, and the idea of this funding coming through and where they're billing the corporation here as well. That this is the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Now, is a foreign intelligence service really going to then put these as your foreign agents in this act? That's why these intelligence operations act like this, but they're meant to be registered with the Attorney General if they're engaging or agree to engage directly through another person, types of conduct for the interest of a foreign principal. That said, it seems like that is enforced when it is not on the side of what you're trying to push either, if that makes sense. That the personality could serve as the face of a channel. We're willing to pay us around $1 to $2 million per year, and this is through a Hungarian shell company to $8,000 a month. So it breaks down the amounts in here, and I'll show you why I think they're getting ripped off. Comment number 1, 4 weekly videos hosted by the commenter live streaming, exchange for a monthly fee of $400,000 plus $100,000 signing bonus and additional performance bonus in exchange for commenter 2 here of $100,000. Now, I've had a look through some of the views on Benny Johnson's channel here, which is, say, double my views, but, mate, $400,000 a month, Jesus Christ. And Tim Pool, they say he's 1.5 times to 2 times my views. Jesus, like, the amount of money that they were funding into this, I'm telling you, they're getting ripped off because the amount of audience they actually reach seemingly isn't that great. And let's continue on of this, sorry. And the last one of this DOJ, of the nearly 10 million from Shell foreign entities through wire transfers, of the actual amount here that ended up going on to commenter 1, 2, and 3. Not exactly sure who commenter number 3 actually is. Now, let's look at this is RT's response. Dear CNN, we certainly have a response. Actually, we have several. We couldn't decide on which one. So, 2016 cliches back. 3 things maintaining life: death, taxes, RT's interference with the US elections. We've got to earn a Kremlin paycheck somewhere secretly. Clinton has said it is sad, that it's not because of her from their press office. So they have gone back on the humour side more of this to try and discredit any of this further. Now, Tim Pool has put up a statement here about with Tenet Media and saying that the broadcast what was here and where their agreement actually was. So you can have a read through this if you want, but it's nothing that I guess we don't really know about this. More will come out into the future on this too. Now, I mentioned just Australian interference. We'll go through this quickly, that the Foreign Interference Task Force was set up in 2020. Countries like China, Cambodia, Rwanda, and Iran. Now, of course, China, geographically, of course, there's much more interest from China rather than Russia in Australia and changing narratives. That said, online is still an international thing that advanced the interests of a foreign regime of an Australian politician who was not named. I know a lot of people very, very, very pissed off about a Australian politician being used to advance interests and not actually being named here. And of course, we've seen the Russian pair born in Australia. I reported on this about 8 to 9 weeks ago, that was working in the space in Australia in the army and sending classified material off. But we have looked at her rank and position in the military. How much would have she actually had? Shit, I don't really know. But the next federal election is on the horizon, and ASIO, of course, that's one of our intelligence agencies, foreign actors introduce disinformation are likely. Let's just assume in any election, anything from now on, there's 1,000% going to be foreign interference online with fucking anything. But this is a huge win for the Democrats. And one side of this informational war can paint now that anything that's different or is not an opinion, it may be an opinion, but it's an opinion that was formed due to Russian disinformation and Russian intelligence campaigns. So it really gives them a lot of credibility. It discredits the other side massively. So the influence that this may have had will be, I believe, far smaller than the influence this has than the other way to discredit the other side. Does that make sense? Because look, these guys were influencing, let's say, a few 100,000 people in the videos. Right. This has now reached an audience of billions. So it's much larger on who has benefited and who hasn't on this. And of course, it does remove any credibility from dissenting voices of difference, because now anyone with a voice that is different to maybe the official towed narrative is, no, you only have that because of a Russian informational campaign warfare through XXX, even if a person doesn't listen to any of those and just has a different opinion on this. Now, one thing that this doesn't go into, and I'd really like it to go into, is how much editorial directional influence did these creators have to have or took from Tenet Media or the Russians? Like, how much did they have on what they say? That would be very interesting to know, because what we do know is all of these creators were standalone, successful right-wing creators, commenters, speakers before this kicked off. So how much change did their narrative push from, I guess, the backdoor funding in this? Now, I'll say, like I've said before and I've been saying for months, I am by no way surprised at all that there are operations to cause division. We've known for a long time the way that other countries look at the US is it's too powerful to ever be forced outwardly. It needs to crumble inwardly, and large countries in charge before, that's how it always goes, as inwards, and they see this division. We know many sources from the Soviets were directly interested in this, doing campaigns exactly that does this, and that from my reading, my research on this, is they don't care which side they push, they don't care, as long as it causes division, therefore they'll push at that. And I would not be surprised at all if there was Russian or Chinese influence on the left side of the media as well, fueling other campaigns. Say, and I've speculated before, that could there be, and like we said, propaganda is the right idea set forth, that's how you make good propaganda. Could there be influence fueling some of the maybe pro-Palestine protests that they're protesting? Yep, good reason. But then as well, maybe some other influence on that, because it causes massive division in the West between the right and the left, and the Labour, Liberal or Democrats, Republicans as well. Division is more important than which side that they are pushing. I don't see this as a left versus right, which of course is how the media and politicians are then promoting this, as of course they have their own campaigns these days, and media influence reporting is basically somewhat of a propaganda campaign in itself somewhat these days, because division, they'll just sow where they can on this. I don't see that they have a objective to push on the right, to promote the right, or to promote the left. Either way, I think it's to push those apart then further, whether it's pushing on 50-year-olds watching Fox or 18-year-olds at university. I don't think that they would care. Now, the other beat that I talk about in this is, I spoke about this at length yesterday, I've spoken about it before, that I don't see that Putin, Kremlin, whatever, wants Trump in power either. Now, Putin has said this yesterday, and I'm going to speak about this, and people say this is psychological warfare itself and reverse psychology as well, and I'm happy to be incorrect on this, but I said that it would have a favourite candidate. It used to be Joe Biden, but now he's not participating in the election campaign. Biden recommended his allies to support Miss Harris, so that's who we're going to do. He quipped with a rough smile across his face. So Putin said this while smiling, that he supported Harris. Now, many have gone, this is a propaganda campaign to discredit her side, reverse psychology, blah, blah, blah. But there's a few things in this. Trump is far less predictable than Harris. And one of the things is, well, Harris has already, we know the Democrats supported this war. We know exactly what that is, because Harris Biden have been in power for 3 to 4 years already. So there's going to not be some huge shift if she were to get in power. She literally just promotes one step up, where Trump, yeah, he may say one thing, but he's highly unpredictable compared to the other side of then the governments as well. And as well with, if you follow the FSB, SVR, even the use then of mercenaries around the world from Russia and what messaging they're putting outwardly, they're trying to paint the West as like an ultra woke liberal. I'm sounding like bloody RFK now, which to me, if they're trying to then influence a Trump victory, it seems to be counterintuitive to their information campaigns in other areas of the world, not the US, which, of course, people are interested in the US, but they're not interested in maybe the billion of people being influenced in Africa or Asia as well. It doesn't seem to align with that. We spoke about Putin's decree of being a humanitarian support for anyone trying to flee like the Western liberal ideals put forwards. So what I'm saying is it doesn't seem to track that Putin would want someone of which he may get along with who has those conservative traditional values in America, where he's trying to paint that it has been lost in America. Does that make sense? That's where it doesn't really go with me in this. And I'm not sure if that is a lie, whether it's a psychological operation. It's bloody, of course, hard to tell, because how much will change in this war if she gets in? Well, she's already in power. If Trump gets in, shit, we have no idea what he may do. He's very, very unpredictable as well. Now, let's look at another bit, and I'm going to go a little bit, I guess, conspiratorial in this as well, around the $10 million for, two major contacts, maybe three, including then the handlers here, for a discredit of the US. And could this potentially be reverse psychology and political sabotage? So could it be that the SVR, FSB, whoever is behind this operation in here, has leaked this somewhat on purpose to further discredit the right, like not leaked it on purpose, but had it be able to be known more on purpose, done this on purpose to be able to further discredit the right, causing even more division? Because what has this done? It's caused even more division. So if division is what they want, they've succeeded in more of this actually being now known. Now, that may be conspiratorial, but it does fall in line with some of these political sabotage as well. Now, we have some historical example here of Operation Gladio to manipulate political outcomes. This was done by NATO operations in the Cold War. They stay-behind operations, typically known. They psychologically manipulate political outcomes. For instance, they might have supported or allowed extremist groups to operate in order to discredit, undermine political movements they're perceived as threats to Western interests. Employ reverse psychology. For instance, an intelligence service might leak information or promote certain narratives that are designed to provoke backlash or drive voters toward a particular candidate or policy by making them feel that leaked information is a smear tactic. Reverse psychology's context relies on manipulation of public perception and behaviour. So could this be it of more of a political sabotage, that they've got some of these quite useful idiots on board? They don't know that even the spies, then their handlers, they also think, yep, we're doing this, but it's purpose to try and discredit the right even further. If then Putin sees that a left in power, or the Democrats in power, is best for his operation maybe in Ukraine and the predictability of US support there, as well as painting outwardly in Europe, in the US, in other areas in the world too, that Russia is this bastion of conservative traditional ideas and that it has been lost in the West. Does that help the information campaign? I hope that makes sense in that reverse psychology, political sabotage way, that maybe Russia's thrown an amount of people under the bus and $10 million in the wind to then cause this division now that we've seen come of this. Does that then make sense? Because that falls in line with the messaging coming from the SVR and FSB, particularly in Africa operations. Now, if you're interested in Operation Gladio, but involve use of assassination, psychological warfare, and false flag operations to delegitimise left-wing parties in Western European countries, so far as anti-communist militias and right-wing terrorism. So, again, could it be to discredit one side, and is it worth throwing some people under the bus of which you don't really care about, and $10 million to discredit that side if you're trying to push on the other way? I know that's very backwards thinking from normal, and I want to know your thoughts on it because I've only had a few hours to actually think about and break this down. But legends, look after yourself. Have a fantastic day. I'm going to go have some cold and flu medication, and I'll let you know about my scans as soon as I can. Righto. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.